In Cycle 9714, the combined legislature of Branch 7 passed the Intergalactic Peptide Export Act by unanimous vote. The vote was unanimous because the Church of the Holy Peptide was the only organization that attended. The remaining 4,200 registered legislative bodies were not notified. The notification system had been reclassified 3 cycles earlier, very quietly, as a sacrament. The Act classifies any citizen whose natural biology produces what the legislation terms looks-max grade peptide compounds as a controlled substance. Not a person who possesses a controlled substance, the person themselves. Their bone structure, their skin, their cheekbone to orbital ratio. All of it reclassified from personal biology to regulated export material. The law established the MOG threshold, a numerical index measuring facial symmetry, bone density, and what the legislation, with no apparent irony, calls structural charisma. Any citizen exceeding the threshold at a customs checkpoint is denied exit from Branch 7. The enforcement arm, the Department of Biological Commerce, was staffed, equipped, and operational within 18 hours of the Act's passage. The church had pre-built the scanners, pre-printed the denial stamps. The infrastructure was waiting in a warehouse before the session began. The department didn't need to be built. It needed to be unwrapped. The church did not stumble into power. Over the 40 cycles preceding the vote, the church quietly registered itself as 4,201 separate legislative interest groups, 1 per seat in the chamber. The Church of the Holy Peptide, the Peptide Wellness Advocacy Council, the Branch 7 Bone Density Appreciation Society, 4,197 others. Branch 7 law defines a quorum as sufficient representation of registered legislative interest groups. 12 church members attended. They sat in 12 seats. They represented, on paper, every registered interest group on the branch. Quorum achieved, technically. The debate lasted 90 seconds. 1 speaker presented the act. 1 speaker seconded the motion. 1 speaker called for the vote. All 3 speakers were High Priest Voss, wearing 3 different hats. There is technically a way out. The MOG exemption permit allows classified citizens to apply for legal exit. The application is 400 pages. It requires a sworn statement of non-exploitative intent regarding one's own facial structure, and a mandatory faith assessment administered by the Church of the Holy Peptide. The Church is the sole authorized permit authority. They wrote the law. They process the permits. They have received 11,412 applications over 247 cycles. 0 have been approved. The official denial rate is 99.97%. The remaining 0.03% are classified as pending. They have been pending since cycle 9714. The most efficient thing the Act ever did was become normal. Within 3 cycles, customs face scanners were as routine as luggage checks. Within 10, children were growing up without knowing it was unusual to have your bone density evaluated before boarding a shuttle. Within a generation, the question was no longer, why does this law exist? It was, what would happen if it didn't? Branch 7 schools now include a mandatory unit on biological commerce. Students practice being scanned from age 6. There are achievement badges. Some children cry when the scanner reads green, when it tells them they are below the threshold. Being classified means you are beautiful. The Act has turned government restriction into a status symbol. The thing that traps you is the thing that proves you matter. Every civilization eventually discovers that the most efficient way to reshape a culture is to make it expensive to be beautiful and free to be compliant. Most civilizations pretend this is an accident. There is one more provision. Section 12, Subsection F, page 389, between a footnote about stamp ink procurement and an index of approved facial measurement tools, addresses what happens to citizens who do obtain an exemption. The clause is 14 words. It has never been read aloud in a legislative session. It states, Approved applicants consent to full biological archival for institutional preservation purposes upon departure. The archive is not a database. It is a cloning facility, located in the basement of the Temple of the Holy Peptide, operational since cycle 9714. The facility produces biological duplicates of every exempted citizen and places them inside the temple, conscious, motionless, decorative. The church calls them living icons. The permit was never an exit. It was a donation form. The Intergalactic Peptide Export Act has been in effect for 247 cycles. It has never been amended. It has never been repealed. It has never been read, in its entirety, by anyone other than the entity that wrote it. The entity, for the record, is a fungal colony that achieved sentience during a scripture copying accident and has served as the church's legal counsel ever since. It does not have a face. It has never been scanned. It considers this a professional advantage.